And let's begin with an opening statement from Halie.
Last time Matt and I debated a year and a half ago, seems like a while ago, because since then our country has been thrown into chaos amid two crises. The first is an unprecedented health crisis in the form of a pandemic that has tragically taken more than 220,000 American lives and has afflicted more than 7 million Americans, not to mention the millions more whose livelihoods have been threatened. Amid this crisis, we know Americans want responsible leadership. Someone who's guided by science and values pikuach nefesh, the sanctity of life, and will make every attempt to return us back to normalcy while preserving and protecting American lives. In recent months, Donald Trump has demonstrated an unwillingness and an inability to protect even his own staff and White House, let alone our country. The second crisis we're facing is the startling rise of hatred and bigotry and anti-Semitism. Last year was the largest number of anti-Semitic attacks in our history, which is no doubt a result of President Trump's emboldening, amplifying, and even alignment with white nationalists. At the last presidential debate, President Trump refused to condemn white supremacy and instead incited a white nationalist group. And at the town hall weeks later, he provided fodder to a right-wing extremist group. In those moments, President Trump has demonstrated exactly who he is, and our lives are at risk because of it. We are now at an inflection point for our country, and this election will decide the trajectory of our future and that of our children. We have a choice: 4 more years of chaos and crisis, or the path to restoring the soul of our nation with Joe Biden. And in this election, no Jewish Americans have to choose between support of Israel and a candidate who shares our values. Because with Joe Biden, you have both. And that's why the choice could not be clearer for Jewish Americans in this election, and why we will overwhelmingly support Joe Biden.
Thank you, Halie. And now for an opening statement, Matt Brooks.
Thank you, Jason. And as I reflect back on the fact that we gathered in 2019 at the start of this campaign season, I can't help but think, our national chairman, Senator Coleman, likes to quote Maimonides a lot. I would like to, in this case, quote another sage philosopher, Rabbi Jerry Garcia. And it has certainly been a long, strange trip that we have been on this past year. Nobody could have predicted when we met with Dana Bash at the last AJ's foreman. This is an important debate. And, I think that we have a lot of people on this call. I think there's a lot of people who clearly have had their minds made up as to who they're going to vote for, whether they're going to vote for President Trump or whether they're going to vote for Joe Biden. Today, I want to spend an hour with you and talk to the people who are truly undecided, because I think this is, without question, one of the most consequential elections, certainly in my lifetime. There are some who say that this is equivalent to 1972, the stark choice between Richard Nixon and George McGovern. Other people say that the real example is 1860. But there is no doubt that the path we have going forward for our country is going to be radically different depending on who wins in 12 days from now. And I believe that the Jewish community, and if you're undecided, if you care about Israel, there is no question you have Joe Biden, 47 years of experience, 47 years of wrong and failed policies, part of the Obama-Biden administration, which was the most hostile administration ever with regard to Israel. And on the other hand, you have President Trump, who's without question been the most pro-Israel president in history. On policy issues like combating anti-Semitism, I know that Halie would love to convince you that somehow this president is soft on rising anti-Semitism. We're going to have a lot of opportunity in this debate to talk about how he signed the historic executive order, making sure that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act applies and protects Jewish students on college campuses against anti-Semitism. If President Trump is as soft on white nationalists as she says, then I would ask all of you to consider why is it that he is leading the charge to classify the KKK as a domestic terror organization. This president has spoken out more than 27 times condemning anti-Semitism, condemning white nationalists, and condemning neo-Nazis. His record on this is unimpeachable, as much as Halie and the Democrats would like to try and promote this mythology. My time is up.
Your time is up. We're going to add a little time to Halie to commentate. But thank you for that opening statement. Let's have rebuttals. Halie, go ahead.
Great. Well, drawing on what Matt said, I will also use some quotes. So 2 quotes. To quote Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And we have seen since Donald Trump was running for office in 2015, his use of hatred as a political tool to further his own agenda. You mentioned an executive order that he signed condemning anti-Semitism, Matt. He violated his own executive order repeatedly since its signing in December of 2019, including just 2 days ago when he used an anti-Semitic slur at a rally in Pennsylvania, referencing globalists, which according to the ADL is anti-Semitic. But also to quote the Republican Jewish Coalition's chairman from March of 2016, I was in complete agreement when he characterized Donald Trump as a misogynist, a fraud, a bigot, and a bully. And since that time, in his 4 years as president, Donald Trump has shown that is exactly who he is. We should have believed him the first time.
Well, thank you, Halie. I assume this is my rebuttal time, Jason.
Go right ahead, Matt.
Thanks for mentioning Senator Coleman. And lest anybody have any doubt whatsoever, I will tell you that Senator Coleman is proudly and enthusiastically supporting President Donald Trump. He has admitted and has spoken extensively about how he was wrong. You talk about misogyny in that quote. There has been no president that has done more to empower and bring women into government than this president. You talk about racism and hatred. There has been no president other than Donald Trump who has done more to step up and combat anti-Semitism. Let me ask Halie this question. Joe Biden has been in office 47 years. He never did an executive order to apply Title VI to help protect Jews who were facing anti-Semitism. They did nothing to declare the KKK a domestic terror organization. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is as much as Halie would like you to believe that anti-Semitism, which clearly is rising in this country, and by the way, I would point out rising on the left and the right. She tends to have a blind eye toward left-wing anti-Semitism. I can assure all of our viewers today that the folks who were assaulting and attacking and viciously beating Jews on the streets of New York, they aren't white nationalists. And we have an anti-Semitism problem in this country from the right and the left, and it did not start on January 20th, 2017. Anti-Semitism has been around since, for centuries. And unfortunately, we're seeing a rise in Europe and here, and we've got to come together in a bipartisan way rather than point fingers and try and lay this at the doorstep to gain partisan political points like Halie does. We need to have a broader conversation about anti-Semitism in this country, and that's why Senator Coleman is supporting President Trump. That's why I'm supporting President Trump, and that's why more Jews in 2020 are going to be supporting President Trump than they did in 2016.
Matt, thank you. Thank you both for your opening statements and your rebuttals. We're going to now go into questions, and I'm going to start, and you'll forgive the sort of self-referential aspect of this, with a question about the AJC survey that was released this week. How do you interpret that survey? Which examined priorities and preferences of the American Jewish voter. It was a multi-issue survey, but the bottom line was that President Trump had the support of 22% of respondents, while Vice President Biden had the support of 75%. And there were across-the-board majorities for the Democratic nominee on every issue, although by a narrower margin on the question of who would be better at strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship. I'll start with you, Halie.
Thanks, Jason. Well, I find it very telling that the same number of Jewish Americans, 75%, who said they were supporting Joe Biden, also believed Joe Biden would be better at handling the issue of the rise of anti-Semitism. And even more, I believe it was more than that, believe that he would be better at handling the COVID pandemic. So these two crises facing our country, an overwhelming majority of Jewish Americans believe Joe Biden is the leader that we need. And that's not only because of his strong record demonstrating leadership. And to Matt, I would say he's never been president before, despite serving as vice president and in the Senate. He himself could not issue an executive order in the past. Soon he may. But, despite that, he has demonstrated leadership on these issues. issues. And we, as a Democratic Party, adopted a strong affirmation condemning anti-Semitism and expressing our support of Israel in our Democratic Party platform this year. Also, I would say an overwhelming majority of Jews answered the poll that they trust Joe Biden more when it comes to Israel. And this is because he has demonstrated leadership on all these issues. And Donald Trump has been a complete failure, emboldening white supremacy. Matt is right. Anti-Semitism didn't start with Donald Trump, but it has no doubt been emboldened, amplified. And to the extent that Donald Trump has even aligned with white supremacy, he is responsible for its emboldening. We have seen him not just align with white supremacists, but actually incite them. He told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. He gave fodder for QAnon. And we saw these groups embrace the president's words as their own and welcome them enthusiastically. That has a direct impact on the rise of hatred and anti-Semitism and bigotry and racism and xenophobia in our country. And yes, it is directly tied to President Trump. And the poll demonstrated that the majority of Jews believe that to be the case, which is why they're supporting Joe Biden.
Thank you, Halie. Matt?
Thanks, Jason. I think that there's a couple takeaways from the poll. First of all, I don't put a lot of stock and a lot of weight or comment publicly on a lot of polls during the course of the campaign. They're all over the place. Each poll has its own different methodology. Each poll is weighted in different ways. But in my 30 years of experience, coupled with the internal polling that I've seen, I remain absolutely confident that President Trump is going to do significantly better. He got 23% of the Jewish vote, right around where your AJC poll was. In 2016, he will do significantly better in 2020. I'm calling it. This is my Babe Ruth moment. I'm pointing to the outfield. I am saying here and now today that President Trump will do noticeably better. Halie is right. A majority of the Jewish community is going to vote for Joe Biden. That's not what this game is about. This game is about small numbers and making a difference in the critical battleground states. All we have to do is to look at the success of Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, who got a historic high 35% of the Jewish vote when he ran in 2018. He won his reelection with about 40,000 votes. So there is no question that shift in the Jewish vote was critical in order for him to win. I will point out in the AJC poll, if you go back to the same poll that you did in 2016, you said that President Trump was going to get 19% of the Jewish vote. He ended up getting 23. It underreported the actual total, and I'm fairly confident. No slight to your poll, but I am actually confident that come election day, the president will do better among Jewish voters, as I said. And I think that, again, Halie, and this is part of their playbook. You ask a question about polls, it automatically defaults to white nationalists, Donald Trump bad, and encouraging white nationalists, which you probably didn't hear us talk about because she didn't mention it, is what about anti-Semitism on the left? What about the rise of the progressive left? What about Ilhan Omar, who, when Halie had an opportunity, she had a chance to support a progressive left-wing candidate in the Democratic Party to beat the most anti-Israel, anti-Semitic candidate in Congress, Ilhan Omar. They chose to sit on the sidelines. So I think this issue is really convenient for Halie when she's able to go on the attack against Republicans. But when it comes time to keeping your own house in order, and standing up and making your words count, they were nowhere to be found.
I was going to go into the next question, but I think we'll have time for rebuttals to this point as well. Halie, would you like to respond?
Sure, absolutely. Well, this election is already underway. Millions of Americans have already cast their ballots, but obviously it'll be over in 12 days. And there are two candidates on the ballot, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Not members of Congress. They may be running for re-election in their own districts in 435th of the country. But Donald Trump is on the ballot, Matt, and he will be judged on his record. He's the one who will be judged on his emboldening of anti-Semitism. The reason we come back to it is because we know this is a large issue driving the Jewish vote in this election, and it's never been the case before. In 2016, we hadn't had unprecedented, horrific attacks on our synagogues. We never had a president who refused to condemn white supremacy, even when asked and pleaded with by a debate moderator. We never had a president who used hate symbols in his advertising for campaigns to the point where they were taken down by Facebook. We never had a president who incited right-wing extremist groups on either side of the aisle. But I will say that any time there has been an act of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic rhetoric, or anti-Israel rhetoric, we as an organization have condemned it on either side of the aisle. We didn't support Ilhan Omar in 2018, just like we didn't support her again in 2020. We have not selectively chosen to condemn or condone or allow anti-Semitism in any way. To the contrary, what we've seen from your organization has been a complete silence when the president himself refuses to condemn white supremacy and frankly repeats anti-Semitic tropes at your own events, as he did in December of 2015 and again in 2019. So you have been selectively silent in condemning white nationalism and the president's emboldening of it, which is precisely why an overwhelming majority of Jews don't view this election as a game and are going to be supporting Joe Biden in this election at an even stronger rate than we saw in 2016.
Matt, a rebuttal to the rebuttal?
Yeah, no, there's a couple. I am thrilled that you raise our record, because I would love to put our record, Halie, against the record of you and the JDCA, because we actually back up our words with actions. We have been unequivocal in our condemnation of Congressman Steve King for multiple years. This year, we not only endorsed his opponent, we helped fund his opponent, and we helped defeat Steve King. Something which, while you say you didn't support Ilhan Omar, you did nothing to take her out and nothing to oppose her. Again, hollow rhetoric from you, action from the RJC. We can also look at Georgia with the race with Marjorie Taylor Greene, somebody who is a QAnon, who traffics in QAnon, who we don't support. We actually engaged in trying to beat her in the Democratic Party. In the Republican Party, we raised money for her opponent. Again, you didn't do anything when given the choice to stand up to Ilhan Omar. It's a cop-out answer, and it's a cop-out record. The reality is, Joe Biden may be on the ballot, but Ilhan Omar, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Rashida Tlaib are going to have an outsized role in his administration. There is no question about it. Bernie and Rashida Tlaib were campaigning for Joe Biden just this last week in Michigan. The squad has already sent a letter to Joe Biden demanding representation in the selection of who's going to be in the cabinet and setting criteria for who is acceptable and not acceptable. If anybody isn't troubled by the rise of the progressive left, the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel progressive left in this party, that Halie and her organization does nothing to dampen down, they are going to be absolutely have a major role in any Joe Biden administration. And I think it's a legitimate issue for undecided voters to think about and to ponder.
Let me turn the page to something else and talk about what's been happening in the Middle East in the last couple of weeks, especially last month at the White House. Israel's prime minister and the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain signed historic peace deals. And the last 3.5 years have seen a procession of steps to demonstrate U.S. solidarity with Israel on a range of issues, from the U.S. Embassy's move to Jerusalem to support for an Israeli proposal to annex a portion of the West Bank. How would your candidate advance Israel's security, approach the Palestinian issue, and widen the circle of Arab-Israeli peace? And I'm going to flip it around and start with you, Matt.
Great, thank you. In fact, I'd love to talk about this, because I think it's one of the hallmarks and one of the cornerstones of the Trump administration so far, is that they have been, without question, the most pro-Israel president ever in history. Jason, your audience is sophisticated. I don't need to spend time talking about how he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, how he moved the embassy, how he gave Israel sovereignty over the Golan Heights, how he ended the Iran deal, and how he's brought incredible peace and historic game-changing peace between Israel and her Arab neighbors in the Gulf. It is unprecedented, and there's a reason, again, while Joe Biden likes to talk about how he's been a 47-year friend of Israel, he and Barack Obama did more to create daylight and separation and undermine the U.S.-Israel relationship than any other administration. I have yet to hear Halie. I have yet to hear the vice president. I have yet to hear Tony Blinken or any of the people around him state what Vice President Biden's position on UN Resolution 2334 was, which is one of the most anti-Israel horrific resolutions ever taken up by the UN that was crammed down the throats of the UN on the final days of the Biden administration, with the support of John Kerry and with the engagement of the administration, which basically said that the historic sites within Israel, the Kotel and the Old City, were not under Israeli sovereignty and Israeli control. It did more to ostracize and to delegitimize Israel than anything. And Joe Biden and his administration with Barack Obama were complicit in it and actually helped foster it. That stands in stark contrast to where President Trump is. And lest anybody in this conversation be curious, as to why or who would be better for Israel, one only has to look to Israelis. 69% of Israelis in the latest poll said they would support President Trump. 19% said Joe Biden would be for Israel. When it comes to deciding who is more pro-Israel, I think that the thoughts of the Israelis who are on the front line, who live with the consequences of this every day, have a lot to say and carry a lot of weight, and they are clearly and strongly supporting President Trump.
Thank you, Matt. Halie.
On the issue of Israel, we have never had a presidential candidate with a longer or stronger record than Joe Biden. Since he was elected in the Senate in 1972, Joe Biden has never wavered in his commitment to Israel's security. And we saw that in 2016, when as a part of the Obama administration, he and President Obama finalized the largest military aid package in our history, 10-year, $38 billion in military assistance, life-saving missile defense programs like Iron Dome. And that commitment is reflected in the Democratic Party platform. That is what we stand for. Our platform, which includes support of the MOU, no conditioning, no cutting of aid. It includes Joe Biden's commitment to that 10-year, $38 billion that was finalized under President Obama. The platform also supports a two-state solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And that is our position. The Republican platform, by contrast, doesn't even exist. Instead of passing a platform, they ended up having a one-page press release. So we don't actually know where the Republican Party stands on this, but we made it very clear that we share Joe Biden's opposition to BDS and support for a two-state solution and support for military assistance to Israel this year. When it comes to the opening of diplomatic relations between Israel and Gulf states, we welcome it. But Israelis themselves are deeply concerned about the potential security implications of this deal. This was a quid pro quo. The United Arab Emirates is now expecting to receive advanced fighter jets, the F-35, which until now Israel is the only country that has this weapon system in the region. If in fact the Emiratis are to receive it, this could compromise Israel's qualitative military edge, which has raised concerns in Israel. We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is opposed to this. It's raised concerns among Israelis. It's raised concerns among members of Congress. And it's pretty clear that President Trump, as he does with everything else, viewed this as a transactional deal. You get peace, he gives you fighter jets. So Joe Biden doesn't approach foreign policy like that. He's demonstrated for decades his leadership, and he's never wavered when it comes to Israel's security.
Rather than rebuttal, I'm going to ask a related question, and you guys can slug it out in that. How central a role does the U.S.-Israel alliance play in your candidate's strategic thinking? And what are the competing forces within your own party on this issue? And let me begin with you, Halie.
I think when America is strong and respected and credible in the eyes of the world, our allies, including our ally Israel, is also stronger. And at this moment, America is weak. And we have seen that even in this administration's recent efforts to pass a UN arms embargo, to reinstate an arms embargo against Iran, or to restart sanctions against Iran, they were unable to do so because we are now isolated as opposed to Iran. That demonstrates that under Donald Trump, our credibility in the eyes of the world has been dramatically weakened, and we can't do things. We can't force other countries to come along with us in the way that perhaps this administration thought it could, because we don't have the kind of alliances that we had previously. With Joe Biden, he would restore those essential alliances to ensure that we could protect the security interests of our vital partners like Israel. He cares about our agreements with the rest of the world, whether it's related to climate change or even the Iran nuclear agreement, which, by the way, while perhaps not a perfect deal, was better than nothing. In the past 2 years, since Donald Trump walked away with it with nothing in its place, now Iran is moving back toward its nuclear development, and there is nothing we can do about it because we are isolated, not Iran. That demonstrates the failure of Donald Trump's leadership, the failure of his foreign policy, and now his inability to actually defend Israel on the world stage.
And if I may just continue with you, Halie, competing forces within your own party on the issue of Israel's place in American foreign policy thinking.
There are a range of views, perhaps on some issues related to Israel, but we came together in terms of the Democratic Party platform. We passed a 91-page platform, which included an ironclad commitment to Israel's security, opposition to the BDS movement, and again, an unequivocal expression of support for the 10-year Memorandum of Understanding, $38 billion in aid. And there's a reason for it. That is because Joe Biden, as leader now of our party, shares those views. So while there may be other views out there, and believe me, there are on Matt's side as well, our party adopted this platform because that is now the view of the party. That has always been the view of the mainstream of our party, and that's the view of Joe Biden.
Thank you, Halie. Matt, Israel's place in the strategic thinking of your party and of the president.
Well, one only has to look at the last several weeks to see how important, my party, how important the Republican Party takes to Israel. If you go back and look at our convention, for instance, Israel was mentioned multiple times throughout the course of the convention by many speakers, and by a terrific film that we showed about the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship. By contrast, the only time Israel was ever mentioned at the Democratic convention was by Linda Sarsour, a radical anti-Israel, anti-Semite who was given a speaking slot at a part of the convention. She was the only one who mentioned the word Israel. The same thing with the debates. Both President Trump and Vice President Biden have both mentioned Israel in their respective debates. This is something that is absolutely essential to the fabric of the Republican Party. I will tell you that if a Republican goes to speak at a Republican event and they stand up and they say, "I stand with Israel," it's an immediate applause line. By contrast, a Democrat can't go and speak at a Democratic event and say, "I stand with Israel," without getting booed and heckled. That's the sad reality of where our two parties are today. That's why the Democrats don't talk about it at their convention. That's why the Republicans do. There is only one pro-Israel party right now, and that's the Republican Party. Unfortunately, the historic bipartisanship that we have seen on Israel doesn't exist anymore. And unfortunately, too many on the Democratic side are willing to hold Israel hostage, either because they don't like President Trump and don't want to support in a bipartisan way the kind of, to borrow a word, progressive thinking that we have for this administration as it relates to the U.S.-Israel relationship and peace in the Middle East and how to achieve it. but they also fundamentally view Israel as a pariah nation. And I think it's very troubling with the rise of the progressive left, how that divide is widening.
I think, Halie, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, and then another bite for you, Matt, as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is just factually inaccurate. I mean, we want to talk about the conventions. The week of your convention, Donald Trump said he moved the embassy to Jerusalem for the evangelicals, right? Matt, he said that. That's just fact. We have videotape of it. And it was really telling because what it demonstrated was two things. One is that Donald Trump views Israel policy through the narrow lens of his own political agenda. What will benefit him personally, politically. And two, he knows Jews don't support him. He called 3/4 of us disloyal last year in what, again, was yet another example of an anti-Semitic trope. On the other hand, our Democratic Party just recently passed, and you failed to, an overwhelming expression of support with Israel, an overwhelming expression of support for the military aid package that's saving lives every day. It's your party, Matt, that's been hijacked by an extreme right-wing group. QAnon now has 24 candidates running for Congress, 22 of them running as Republicans, 2 as independents. There's a reason. That's because under Donald Trump, the Republican Party has become a political home for right-wing extremists. You mentioned Marjorie Greene. I know that you didn't support her, but it's unfortunate that the reason she won is because the candidate you're spending $10 million to reelect in this election, Donald Trump, did. He welcomes right-wing extremists. So while the RJC might not welcome extremism, your party has been hijacked by someone who does and has used that to move your party to the right, to the point where it has endangered the Jewish community. And again, that is the reason. Jewish Americans know it. It's the reason that we're overwhelmingly supporting Joe Biden.
We've talked a little bit about Iran, but I think we need to go back to it a little bit more. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was negotiated and implemented in the Obama-Biden administration, and the U.S. withdrew from that Iran nuclear deal 29 months ago under President Trump. How would your candidate counter the threat of Iran's nuclear ambitions and its regional aggression? And let me start with you, Matt.
Look, this is one of the cornerstone achievements of the Trump administration, is ending the flawed Iran deal. And on top of that, President Trump had the courage to take out the most vicious killer of Americans and Israelis and leader of the global terror network, Qasem Soleimani. President Trump took him out. By contrast, Joe Biden opposed the killing of Soleimani. When President Trump took out Soleimani, the Iranians and the rest of the world knew that he was absolutely serious. And again, not only did Vice President Biden oppose the killing of Soleimani, he opposed the killing of Osama bin Laden. He opposed the killing of al-Baghdadi. Because of these assassinations, Baghdadi and Soleimani, the world is a much safer place today. Again, Joe Biden wrong on the issues and on the wrong side of history.
Halie, let me turn to you on Iran.
Great. Well, I think that we can agree, actually, that Iran should never acquire a nuclear weapon. And under President Obama and Vice President Biden, they had a plan to ensure that wasn't the case. The JCPOA actually took Iran from 3-month breakout time to achieving a nuclear weapon to more than a year. Under the JCPOA, there were inspectors on the ground to verify Iran's progress in terms of dismantling its nuclear program. When Donald Trump decided to walk away from that nuclear deal with nothing to replace it, he united those of us. There were some, even on our side of the aisle, that we knew it wasn't a perfect agreement, but he united the whole Democratic Party. He united even some in Israel in the security establishment, because having nothing was far worse than having something in place to ensure Iran can't acquire a nuclear weapon. And today we see just how flawed that strategy was, because now Iran is moving back towards its nuclear nuclear enrichment, its uranium enrichment, its nuclear program is on the trajectory. It is closer today to acquiring a nuclear weapon than before President Trump took office. And that's because of his failure. And as I mentioned, this administration can't even now get the allies it needs to reimpose sanctions, to reinstate an arms embargo. And by President Trump withdrawing troops from northern Syria, he's also created a vacuum of leadership on Israel's northern border that Iran has now exploited. So this administration has been a complete failure when it comes to Iran, and Joe Biden would work with our allies to reinstate measures to ensure Iran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon, to return to where we were, which was that Iran verifiably would have at least a year breakout time, if not longer. And he's shown that he's able to execute that because they successfully did, until President Trump, decided to walk away with nothing to replace this agreement.
President Trump has adopted the slogan America First in describing his approach to international affairs. And as he told the UN General Assembly last month, he expects every government to put its own country first. How would your candidate assure America's leadership role in international affairs? And I'll start with you, Halie, and then go to Matt.
Well, what we have seen from President Trump has actually been a denigration of our allies, of leaders throughout the EU, around the world. I mean, he has single-handedly jeopardized not just our alliances in terms of our essential military alliances with NATO and other country and other groups out there, but also he has jeopardized our credibility. He has jeopardized these essential alliances that we've demonstrated can help ensure our security. So, one of Donald Trump's first things that he did was getting rid of the Paris Climate Change Accord. And since then, he has continued to dismantle every international agreement that was put into place under President Obama. We know that an overwhelming majority of Americans believe in climate change, supported efforts like that, and frankly, support international agreements and working with the rest of the world to achieve our national security interests. So while President Trump may demand America first and that other countries should put themselves first, at the same time, he has isolated us. It is us, the United States, that is now isolated, not our adversaries like Iran. And something else that President Trump has done has been emboldening our adversaries like Russia by refusing to ever acknowledge their interference in our 2016 election, which we know is ongoing to this day in our 2020 election. So he has not only isolated and ostracized the United States from the rest of the world, but he has also undermined our national security interests, which again do jeopardize our ability to secure our allies, such as Israel.
Thank you, Halie. Matt, America's role in international affairs and America's leadership in international affairs.
Thanks. And look, Jason, if you want to understand the statesmanship and the diplomacy of President Trump, I would again refer everybody back to what we just saw in the last few weeks with the signing of the Abraham Accords. When the president talked about his vision for Mideast peace, Halie, Democrats, and the entire foreign policy establishment said the president was wrong and the president was nuts. And right now, he's again proving them correct, as he did when he moved the embassy and when he ended the Iran deal, that his vision is the right vision. And as a result, we have a Middle East that's more stable and more secure because there's peace between Israel and some of our most important and vital Arab nations. But beyond that, the president is working to ensure that we do have the strongest possible military to defer aggression from our adversaries around the country, around the world. And there's also a reason Halie says we're soft on Russia. The amount of sanctions that this president has put on Russian banks and on Russian businessmen and on Russian actors who are doing bad things is unprecedented. There's a reason that the director of national intelligence came out with a press conference last night to talk about how both the Iranians and the Russians are working to undermine the election and to defeat President Trump, because they know that they will be better off under a Biden administration than they are under a Trump administration. With regard to NATO, I think what the president is doing and has been doing to encourage our NATO partners to carry their fair share of the burden is absolutely important. Germany and other countries which have been paying below what was agreed upon need to step up. They have the resources and the ability, and it's unfair for America to have to consider to continue to share the burden of the financial burden and the military burden of our joint alliances. And I think that the president is right for shining a light on that, just as he is on the trade stuff and WTO, and making sure that our trade deals are fair and our trade partners are actually acting fairly and helping. And that's one of the reasons that I think the president is also trying to ensure that we don't have, as we work our way out of this pandemic, the problem that we had before, where so much of our resources, our vital resources, our PPE, our pharmaceuticals, and everything which were being produced in China, come back home, get repatriated. America First, meaning bring our manufacturing back, so that the next time we don't have to rely on another country and their ability to affect our chances of producing the kind of materials that is in America's national interest.
Thank you, Matt. Halie, would you like to respond?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important that we talk about the military. Obviously, Joe Biden had in Bo a son who served. When I was working in the Senate, I actually had the honor of going to Iraq and seeing Bo when he was serving. I know how important military families are to Joe Biden. And you contrast that with Donald Trump, who has denigrated our military. He called them losers and suckers. He failed to do anything about intelligence that indicated that Russia had a bounty on their heads in Afghanistan. He has had false accusations and bullied the late great John McCain. It is completely antithetical to our values and who we are as a country to see a leader speak in the way he has about our military. And, I think this does weigh in when it comes to the Jewish vote. It's just not who we are. Donald Trump has truly been a betrayal of our values. And Joe Biden is someone we know understands our community, understands our values, and truly knows what it means to have America first, because he has demonstrated with his own family that those who serve our country, those who sacrifice for our country, deserve our honor and our respect. And the same could not be said about Donald Trump.
Thank you, Halie. Matt, final word?
Look, I think if anybody doesn't believe that President Trump has done more to rebuild and revitalize our military, he totally turned the VA upside down and on its head, which has been an absolute disaster in terms of caring for those people who have made incredible sacrifices for our country, who can't get basic medical care. President Trump's record on this, despite what Haley's trying to portray, is unimpeachable. America is stronger. Our military is stronger, and we're taking care of our soldiers. And rather than respond to anonymous sources like that Halie is citing that have been proven to be incorrect, I would just say that this president, and you can see by the strong patriotic support that he's getting in our military community, has earned the support of the military. He is so passionate about our men and women in uniform. He's the only one that's trying to bring our soldiers home from these endless wars. He wants to keep them safe, and I think that the president has an incredibly strong record on this.
We're going to go back to the issue. Thank you, Matt. We're going to go back to the issue of anti-Semitism, which we were discussing earlier in this discussion. Anti-Semitic expressions and anti-Semitic acts, including the unspeakable attacks in Pittsburgh and Poway, have increased in recent years, both in the United States and abroad. And vile and dangerous conspiracy theories on Holocaust denial are common on the internet. Although it must be pointed out that we've recently made some progress on the social media front, a matter on which AJC has devoted considerable attention, mostly behind the scenes. How would your candidate fight the scourge of anti-Semitism in America and globally? And is this a priority?
Okay.
Go ahead, Halie.
Joe Biden, when he declared he was running for president, did so because of Charlottesville. right? He has said that was a wake-up call for him. And to see the U.S. president equivocate and equate those marching in our streets, neo-Nazis, saying Jews will not replace us, with others peacefully protesting them, including a protester who lost her life, that was a wake-up call for Joe Biden. He is running for president to restore the soul of our nation, and that includes restoring security to the Jewish community. He's made it very clear that he would do everything he could to combat the rise of anti-Semitism. And he's been very clear. You don't see him hesitating in denouncing white supremacy. He's never once did that. And he has a plan. He would restore funding for critical efforts to address domestic extremism, which the Trump administration cuts. He would work for domestic terrorism law that respects free speech, and he would break this nexus between gun violence and extremism, which directly led to these horrific attacks we've seen in our synagogues in Pittsburgh and in Poway. By taking away the AR-15s from these white nationalists who have been emboldened by our president, that would directly help to ensure the security of our community. And I'll end by quoting the AJC itself, because after Donald Trump refused to denounce white nationalists, the AJC said, bigots, racists, and anti-Semites are rejoicing at your, Donald Trump's, refusal to condemn white supremacy. The AJC went on. There can be no ambiguity on this issue. White supremacists should not be told to stand by. They need to be renounced completely, and Donald Trump has failed to do so. In response, your organization, Matt, the RJC, said nothing. And meanwhile, other Republicans actually did, because it was such a startling moment, a true reckoning for our country that demonstrates when it comes to the security of our community and frankly, other communities that have been targeted by white supremacy, Joe Biden is the only one running for president who we know would be on our side, would defend our interests and our security, while Donald Trump has emboldening those who are directly threatening us.
After the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May, that led to an outpouring of grief and anger, as well as introspection. And there were also ugly acts of violence in many cities. How has your candidate addressed these issues, and how would he going forward? Let me start with you, Matt.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a little bit of my time just because I didn't get a rebuttal to Halie, but I did want to make 2 points real quickly. First of all, the biggest bubba mitzvah in this entire election season is the narrative that Trump somehow did not condemn white nationalists in Charlottesville and talked about good people on both sides. If you look at the actual quote from his transcript, and I've got it right here, he said immediately after that, he said, I am not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally, exclamation point, period. As much as Halie would like you to believe he didn't say that, that is his direct and exact quote. I would also point out for your viewers today that Halie refused to take a look at what I had raised about anti-Semitism and hatred on the left, because I think it is a real problem. And again, she wants to try and appeal to her base as opposed to people in the middle. And I think we understand that we have a threat on anti-Semitism from the left and the right. With regard to George Floyd, the murder, and it was a murder of George Floyd, is absolutely unconscionable. We have a problem in this country that I believe we need to have a serious conversation about racism. There's clearly things that all of us can do better, and an issue that needs to be done. The difference is the Democrats are willing to indict the entire men and women of law enforcement, whether you're good cops or bad cops. That's why there is this rise in the Democratic movement to defund the police. If you're worried and you care about anti-Semitism, the last thing that you want to do is have an effort to defund the police. The last thing that our African-American communities in our inner cities want or should want is to defund the police. What we need to do is we need to fight bad cops. The people who hate bad cops the most are good cops. And it's terrible that the left and the Democrats think that the only answer is to defund the police. And we're seeing it with a refusal to act to keep our streets safe. We're seeing rioting and looting and violence in major inner cities in this country, whether it's Seattle or Portland or Minneapolis or DC or New York. What's happening is absolutely horrible and heartbreaking. We need to restore law and order. We need to bring back peace in our streets so that people can walk the streets, whether you're a Hasidic Jew walking in Borough Park or whether you're someone who lives in Washington, D.C. or Seattle, to know that you're not going to be harassed at a restaurant while you're eating outside. But we also have to have a serious conversation about race relations and how we heal this divide and how we come together and strengthen and build on the success that we've had at moving America forward from its racist past to a period of true equality.
Yes, so I will start by saying when you're relitigating something your candidate said over 3 years ago that is still very much true today, that he refused and continues to refuse to condemn white supremacy, you know you're on the losing side of the argument. I would also say that Joe Biden does not support defunding the police. That is just patently false. But, I can tell you what Joe Biden wouldn't do in response to the unrest we have seen in our streets. He would not gas Americans in order to provide himself with a photo opportunity. And after that gassing in front of the White House, I took to the streets. I put on my mask and got out there with the protesters because no Americans deserve that kind of treatment from the President of the United States. And also to express support for the Black Lives Matter movement, because what we saw happened not just to George Floyd, but we've seen it to so many Americans. It is not right. It's not who we are as a country. And there needs to be police reform to ensure we don't see this kind of brutality, targeting some going forward, banning police chokeholds, and ensuring racial justice. There has to be racial justice in our country. And we as an organization support and stand with communities calling for Black Lives Matter in this moment. And certainly those out there on the streets, those protesting, do not deserve the kind of treatment we've seen. And it's not just in front of the White House, but also in Portland and in many of our cities where President Trump has authorized unmarked officers to detain and arrest Americans in what can only be considered a complete erosion of our democratic institutions and our rights as Americans to speak out in support of our values. And that's why we know that an overwhelming majority of Jewish Americans also support the Black Lives Matter movement and support those protesters out there that have been for months now expressing support and, like me, have joined them because historically, the Black community and the Jewish community, and frankly, the Jewish Black community, we have been united in support of rights. And we have seen those equal rights be attacked by President Trump.
So we're going to go to closing statements.
Again, appealing to those of you who are watching who haven't made up your mind, I think you see a very stark contrast between what President Trump will do on so many issues of critical importance to us, and what Joe Biden has refused to do or hasn't done in 47 years of public service. If the most important issue to you is Israel, there is no question that President Trump has been the most pro-Israel president in history. We went through it extensively today, again, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy, ending the Iran deal, bringing peace between Israel and our Arab neighbors are all cornerstones and historic achievements of what this president has done. If you care about the economy, this president presided prior to the horrific assault from COVID on the largest economic expansion we'd ever have in history. There is a reason why in the last Gallup poll, 56% of Americans feel they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. We're going to need to rebuild after COVID, and there's only one person, President Trump, who can get people back to work and get the economy moving again, as we've done in the past. Joe Biden will raise your taxes. We didn't talk about any domestic issues, but Joe Biden will do a $4 trillion tax increase. President Trump has cut taxes for the American people. As we talked about, the Democrats want to defund the police and view the law enforcement as our enemy rather than our allies. Halie said that the president was wrong to crack down not on peaceful protests, but on violent protests, which is what we're seeing in Portland and in cities across the country. President Trump will bring law and order back to our streets. But most importantly, I hear from a lot of you, and I hear in my own family and in people I talk to, they say to me, Matt, I like President Trump. I like what he's done on Israel. I like what he's done on foreign policy and the economy and national security. But what do you say about his tweets? What do you say about the coarseness of his rhetoric? And to me, the answer I always say is, I don't love every tweet that President Trump makes. I don't love every comment that President Trump makes. Some of them, quite frankly, rub me the wrong way. But it's not about the words, it's about the actions. And the actions that this president has done to support the Jewish community, to stand with Israel, to make America safer and more secure, to make sure that our economy is robust, that African Americans and Hispanics and all Americans are getting jobs and working again and helping to lead us through this pandemic are more important than the occasional tweet or comment that you might find objectionable. This is about leadership. Joe Biden has had 47 years to lead. We know what his record of inaction is. Within the last 4 years, we know all of the stuff that President Trump has done. And I think the choice is very clear. And thanks again for having me.
I actually found Matt's closing argument very interesting, because essentially what he's saying is you should compromise the way he is. That despite what Donald Trump has said, and don't take it literally, which is not a standard that the RJC has for others, by the way, is in fact how we as Jews should compromise. Let's accept someone who doesn't share our values because of an alleged support of Israel, which, as discussed today, is not universally recognized by a majority of Americans. The reality is you don't have to compromise. With Joe Biden, you have someone who doesn't just say, I want to restore the soul of our nation. For almost 5 decades, he showed us what that looks like, because he's never wavered when it comes to our values. And our values, of course, include support of Israel, but also go well beyond that. Access to affordable health care. Amid the biggest health crisis of our country, we know Donald Trump wants to take away health care for over 20 million Americans. And now about 8 million of us have a new pre-existing condition. Access to affordable health care is the number one issue driving not just the Jewish vote, but the American electorate writ large in this election, because it is a matter of life or death. And we know when it comes to their records that Donald Trump wants to take it away, and Joe Biden is someone who stands with Americans and wants to ensure we are healthy and that we have access to health care. And also, there's so many values that we as American Jews hold dear. And we know that Joe Biden is on our side when it comes to all of them, because he shares our views, he shares our values, and he's running for president because of the rise of hatred in our country, because he wants to restore the soul of our nation. You don't have to compromise the way Matt described. You don't have to accept someone's bullying, misogynistic fraud, and even mean tweets. You don't have to accept any of it. In 12 days, we can get rid of it, because the truth is this actually is not about politics. This is about something much larger in terms of who we are as a country, our values as a country, and our values as a community. Donald Trump has betrayed us as a country. He's betrayed our values. He's betrayed our national security interests. He has endangered our community. And 4 more years of Donald Trump would be even worse than what we've seen in the past 4 years, for one essential reason we haven't described today. And that is because he continues to try to erode our democracy. He has called into question all that we are and all that we can be. And it is only Joe Biden who has our best interests in mind and who will ensure a stronger future for us and for our children. So I'll be supporting Joe Biden. I know the overwhelming majority of Jews stand with me in supporting Joe Biden. And it's not just because we are historically Democrats. It's because Joe Biden shares our values, our support of Israel, our caring for others, and our our trajectory, our vision for what we want in our future and what we want for our children's futures.